Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're just going to give participants another minute or so to trickle in before we get started. The numbers are still increasing, so I'll still give a few seconds. All right, we're steady at 56 and 57, and so I'll just get started. So hello, everyone, again, and thank you for joining us today. And welcome to this Climate Resilient by Nature program webinar on disability inclusion in nature-based solutions, how practitioners can move from commitment to action. Today's webinar brings together a diverse group of presenters from CBM Australia, the National Disability Forum Solomon Islands, the Disability Centre, Service Centre in Laos, and WF Solomon Islands and WF Laos. Throughout the session, you'll hear from our speakers through a variety of presentation formats. My name is Shalin Siba. I'm a project manager with WF Australia's Climate Resilience and Adaptation team. I am a woman with long black hair wearing a thick wool turtleneck sweater today. A reminder that this session is being recorded. Participants will likely not be able to turn on their cameras during the webinar, but if you do have any concerns about the recording, of course, please let us know. I'm joining you all from Gadigal country, Sydney, Australia. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm joining today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. We welcome participants joining from across the Pacific, the Mekong region, Australia, and beyond. And we extend this acknowledgement to the custodians of the land wherever you are joining us from today. This slide features an Australian Indigenous artwork of a whale mother and a calf swimming together, representing care, connection, and intergenerational knowledge. We'd like to share a few accessibility considerations today to help everyone participate fully. We've enabled closed captions in Teams. If you wish to use these, you can switch them on under the settings. We've also added alternative text to images used in the presentation. Throughout the session, presenters will provide verbal descriptions of the non-decorative images that we use on the slides, and we will also read out key comments and questions from the chat. We also encourage you to engage and interact in the chat. As many of you have indicated, this is a preference for today's webinar. If at any time you would like a speaker to slow down, please let us know. And you're also welcome, of course, to take sensory breaks at any time during the session. And you can also navigate through the slides at your own pace as this feature has been enabled. We recognize that everyone has different accessibility needs, and we encourage you to do what works best for you today so that you can participate comfortably. Before we delve into today's topic into more detail, I'd like to provide a brief context setting by introducing the Climate Resilient by Nature program and explain briefly where this Disability Inclusion Learning program fits within the broader initiative. The Climate Resilient by Nature program, or CRBN, it's an Australian government initiative that was launched in 2021 and which has very recently concluded in June of this year, at the end of this year. The program was managed by WWF Australia and was delivered in a close partnership with several NGO partners, many of which have joined us today, local communities, and also civil society organizations and government partners, all in the Indo-Pacific region. The program aimed to advance equitable nature-based solutions that protect ecosystems, strengthen livelihoods, and build resilience to climate change. The images on the right illustrate some examples of CBM-supported projects. The underwater image at the top shows coral reef restoration work, where a marine scientist is establishing a coral nursery by attaching coral fragments to metal frames. This work was led by Kaima Foundation and Corals for Conservation in Fiji. The image at the bottom shows a person paddling a narrow canoe through a wetland landscape in the Mekong region. It reflects WWF-led efforts in Laos and Vietnam to restore and sustainably manage freshwater ecosystems in partnership with local communities. This disability inclusion learning program forms part of CBM's broader learning agenda, and it is one of 5 thematic learning programs that were developed under this initiative. The others explored voluntary carbon markets, blue food systems, nature-positive livelihoods, and traditional ecological knowledge. If you'd like to explore these resources, Veronica will now share a link to the CBM Knowledge Hub in the chat. This Knowledge Hub also includes several resources from across the program and also includes the independent end of program evaluation that we've completed recently. So now moving on to the Disability Inclusion Learning Program. So this learning program was developed and implemented in partnership with CBM Australia, the National Disability Forum Solomon Islands, the Disability Service Centre in Laos, and WWF teams in Laos and Solomon Islands. And the question we started with and that we wanted to explore was, how can nature-based solutions be designed, implemented, monitored, and adapted so that people with disabilities could participate meaningfully and also benefit equitably? We also wanted to try and move a bit from awareness raising and try and generate more of a practical kind of resource that could support practitioners working on nature-based solutions across the Indo-Pacific. And the learning program itself, it was structured into 3 interconnected components. The first part focused on undertaking a literature review to better understand the existing evidence, the guidances relating to disability inclusion and nature-based solutions, and included reviewing resources such as the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solution, or DFAT's International Disability Equity and Rights Strategy, and the broader literature on disability inclusion. The second part was a participatory action research in Laos and Solomon Islands. Here, WWF, the CBM teams, OPD partners, and community members all work together to explore how disability inclusion is experienced within nature-based solutions initiatives. The research component included interviews, focus group discussions, accessibility walkthrough, and self-assessment, and examine issues such as participation, accessibility, livelihoods, and also enabling systems in the communities itself. Finally, all of these insights from the literature review and field research informed the development of a disability inclusive nature-based solutions practitioner's guide, which we'll introduce later in today's webinar. We're also pleased to share that a learning package including all of these 3 parts will be made available through the CBM Knowledge Hub later this month. So the rest of the webinar will also follow the same journey as the learning program itself and structured in these 3 parts. But we will try and conclude with a question and reflection session. And please note any questions that come to your mind as we go through the presentation, and we'll try to address some of them at least within the questions and reflections session. So as I hand over to Ruth, you are welcome to please share in the chat where you're joining us from today and your role or area of work. We'd also like to hear from you about a challenge you faced or a question you have regarding disability inclusion in your programs or project. So with that, as we transition and you respond, over to you, Ruth, from CBM Australia. Thank you. You can take control. Yeah, great.
Thanks so much, Helene. Hello, everybody. My name is Ruth Bryce. I'm a Senior Advisor with CBM Australia. To give you a visual description of myself, I'm a middle-aged white woman with shoulder-length hair. I'm wearing glasses, and today I'm wearing a pink jumper because it's very chilly where I'm calling from in Melbourne. My colleague, my CBM colleague, Jerome Zayas, and I have been working with WWF Australia to design and undertake this learning opportunity over the last year or so. In this section, I'll share what we did and why. This learning opportunity grew out of the recognition that while nature-based solutions are becoming increasingly important approach to addressing climate change, biodiversity loss, and building community resilience, we know relatively little about how people with disabilities are participating in and benefiting from these initiatives. So WWF and CBM saw an opportunity to help fill this evidence gap. We wanted to better understand the experiences of people with disabilities in nature-based solution programs, including what helps enable meaningful participation and what barriers still need to be addressed. The research was also designed to generate practical lessons and tools that organisations can apply in their own climate and resilience programming. And to help this translate and move this from commitments to disability inclusion towards practical evidence-informed action. In terms of what we did, this research used participatory action research approach in 2 countries, Laos and Solomon Islands. And a key feature of this was the co-design partnership between WWF, local organisations of persons with disabilities, and CBM Australia. Each of us brought a different perspective and experience. The WWF field teams brought local knowledge and trusted community relationships. The OPD consultants, the organisations of people with disabilities, brought their lived experience and disability rights expertise. They helped lead discussions with people with disabilities, supported inclusive practice amongst WWF staff, and connected the research team with people with diverse disabilities in and around the target communities. And CBM's role was to provide technical support on participatory research design, OPD engagement, and frameworks for inclusive NBS. Together, our team designed and implemented interviews and focus groups for a range of community members. Within the target communities, we led accessibility walkthroughs and observation of nature-based activities and materials, specifically thinking about who might be excluded due to access, information, or the physical demands of the activities, and how modifications might help people participate. We analysed all of this data through a range of participatory validation sessions and feedback opportunities. These activities helped us build a picture, not only of the presence and or participation of people with disabilities, but also the quality of that participation and how the experiences might vary by location, gender and disability and other intersecting factors. The findings showed that there were 5 interconnected themes: participation, governance, accessibility, livelihoods, benefit sharing, and enabling systems. Participation: were people with disabilities actually involved in the activities? Governance: were people with disabilities involved in decision-making at all? Accessibility: thinking about modifications and innovation to make sure people with diverse disabilities can get to the areas, use the equipment, and understand the information. Livelihoods and benefit sharing: to what extent were people with disabilities economically and socially benefiting from this program? And broader systems and attitudes within the context. These themes are the building blocks for the inclusive nature-based solution practitioner guide which Jerome will introduce later in the session. As NBS practitioners, you'll already know that context matters. Likewise, disability inclusive nature-based solutions doesn't look the same everywhere. While we used a common research framework across the two countries, the way it was applied reflected the local context. In Laos, the research focused on freshwater ecosystems using fish conservation zones, village development funds, and governance structures with a fisheries and agricultural livelihood focus. In the Solomon Islands, the CBM centered on coastal ecosystems, mangroves, reefs, sea grape value chains, and customary governance and coastal livelihood. To give you some more insight into how the work was done across the two different programs, we've invited some other people from our research team to be involved in sharing this. The Lao research team included the WWF field team, Mr. Akio Kumanaryong from the Disability Service Centre, and 2 CBM advisors who supported the research in their coordination, tool development, and research implementation remotely. The field trip consultations took place over 4 days with engagement of the team over about 2 months. To hear more about this work, we have a short video from Keo to share the significant findings in the research and what he sees as key for inclusive nature-based solutions in Laos going forward. I'll just enable this video. And to share about the Solomon Islands, the team in the Solomon Islands included the WWF field team and volunteers, 2 members of the OPD, National Disability Forum, and some in-person involvement from CBM Australia. You can see our research team on the top right of the screen. And to share more about this, I'm going to play some audio from Naomi, who was one of the OPD consultants on in our research team. And continuing to hear from the Solomon Islands team, I'd like to hand over to Sedella, who is the WWF Gender Advisor in the Solomon Islands. Sedella, you can take control of the slides now.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sidela. I am a dark-skinned woman with coarse hair, and I've got a geometric dress on just because I find it cute. So continuing on with our slides, I think it's very important for us to also hear a little bit about the things we found on the ground. Um, Naomi has shared a lot of good things about it already. A few things that we picked up from community engagement is really around three main areas, which is really understanding inclusion beyond participation. We always talk about meaningful engagement and the shift from attendance sheets to people really feeling empowerment. And when it comes to people with disabilities, in the Solomon Islands context, we already have a pretty bit, large piece of work cut out for us because of the stigma and the cultural beliefs that surround disability as well. Um, the barriers when it comes to the whole integrated work around JEDC and with people with disabilities, they do become a little more invisible. Um, Even as we try as much as possible to integrate more social inclusion in our work, it really depends on how willing the community is able to participate in disability inclusion. And a lot of our trainings, and with this piece of research especially, it really brought a lot of new information and shed a new light on our cultural and our context in the community. And of course, context is quite important. We are predominantly Melanesian. We have a lot of cultural beliefs around disability inclusion. So with the research coming in, it really helped a lot of people understand that sometimes disability itself, it is not something where we just look at people with disabilities as purely for their disability. They have a lot to contribute in the communities, and it's just a matter of us reframing that as well. Again, there is a lot of interest in inclusive conservation. It was actually during this research that a lot of people with disabilities were participating for the first time directly in WWF conservation work, which is as unfortunate as that was. I think it led us into a really clear direction of how we needed to engage more with people with disabilities. They wanted to also understand how would disability inclusion really look in their communities. Of course, when we're talking about our communities, these are rural places where we do not have wharves. We have a jetty, a wooden one that people will struggle to get in and out of boats from. So, in a context like that, it does mean we have to make sure that when we talk about disability inclusion, it is standardized for us in a way that is also fitting to be absorbed by our communities. So, for the program side of things, in terms of our office, we are really looking forward to working better with Naomi's team and the FSI on how we can really tailor our approach in terms of conservation, also understanding community priorities, but in that area also being open and willing to understand the context of our communities as well. If disability inclusion isn't a priority, this is where we gently start to open up the conversation on it as well. And that also means integration on a lot of our JEDC work and our partnerships, such as with CBM and with NDFSI. And of course, in our different seascapes for the ANCP and NBS work, the Western Province government plays a huge role as well. Um, Coming around to team reflections, a lot of the participatory models that were employed in this research were very well done, and they were I think it allowed a really good safe space for a lot of our people, parents, caregivers, primary caregivers, and also people with disabilities to finally be heard in a way that they may not have been engaged in before. And I think um, when it comes to setting up environments like that, even though this research was there for just a week or so, but it really allowed a lot of progress in our disability inclusion work on the ground. And of course, when we talk about challenges as well, when we say people remain hard to reach, we have to work around very tricky geographical locations as well. And of course, when we work with the communities, there's different elements we have to think about. And when we pair that with resourcing and allocations for our work as well, we have a lot of different moving parts. So that is a challenge in itself, but I like to look at them as opportunities as well. In terms of the future, we look forward to having more evidence, such as the ones that have come out of this research for Gen Z integration in not only in the Solomon Islands office, but hopefully for the Pacific program as well. We have to really make sure that when we talk about inclusion, disability inclusion has to be at the forefront as well. And we have to really navigate how we do our socializing in our different cultural contexts as well. And I think one thing that's really important for us to be mindful of is sometimes the pacing of our organizations may not be able to align with the appetite that's coming from disability inclusion in our communities. And that opens up a lot of areas where we can discuss across the network as well. And I think I'd like to leave this with, yeah, a really good, I guess, statement where conservation outcomes and inclusion outcomes are deeply connected. And when people can participate, influence decisions, and benefit equitably, conservation becomes stronger, locally owned, and sustainable. So I'd like to thank WWF Australia for your support in this, CBFM, and NDFSI for the Solomon Islands Gang. But definitely huge congratulations to our Laos team as well. Thank you. Handing it over to Ruth.
I'm gonna jump in, Sede. Thank you so much for this lovely presentation, Sede. Ruth, are you here with us? If not, until we wait for Ruth to come back, I'll pass it over to Jerome to introduce us to the practitioner's guide. Thank you, Jerome. Over to you.
Thank you, Charlene. Hello, everyone. My name is Jerome Zayas. I'm a senior advisor of CBM Australia, middle-aged man, a Filipino, and proudly so because of the recent tennis victory that we had, and with short cropped hair, wearing glasses. So having shared some of the findings from our research, the obvious question becomes, so what do we do with this knowledge? Research is valuable, but because it helps us understand what needs to change. But for us practitioners working on the ground, that's only half the story. The real challenge is knowing how to translate those insights into day-to-day practice. And together with our colleagues from WWF, our partners in Laos and in Solomon Islands, this is exactly why we developed the Practitioner's Guide to Disability Inclusive Nature-Based Solutions. So rather than being another report that sits on a shelf, the guide is designed as a practical resource for practitioners so that they can use it throughout the entire NBS project cycle, from planning and design through implementation to monitoring, learning, and adaptation. The guide brings together the evidence we collected from this research and translates it into practical actions. It includes tools and checklists that teams can use in the field. We also have real-world examples drawn from our work in Laos and Solomon Islands, and some reflective questions that encourage practitioners to think more critically about how inclusive their own programs really are. But more importantly, we recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to nature-based solutions. Every community, ecosystem, and governance context is different. So rather than prescribing a single way of working, the guide offers adaptable approaches that can be tailored to local realities while maintaining the principles of meaningful disability inclusion. So what's inside the practitioner guide? One of the principles that helped us in the development of this resource was that it needed to be genuinely useful for all practitioners. We did not produce intentionally another technical publication, but what we wanted to do is to create something that people could pick up and apply in their everyday work. So we organized the guide around the NBS project cycle, so it can be used from the earliest planning stages through to implementation and ongoing learning. It begins with, as you can see there, understanding context. And before we can design inclusive interventions, we first need to understand, first of all, who is in the community, and more importantly, who may be excluded and why. And the guide, therefore, includes tools for disability, inclusive situation analysis, stakeholder mapping, and practical guidance on engaging organizations of persons with disabilities as partners. And I emphasize this. We we engage them as partners throughout the process and not just as someone we consult. And it then moves into designing inclusive, nature-based solutions, helping practitioners think through participation, accessibility, governance, and livelihoods. And these are the research areas that have been found to have consistently showed the greatest influence on whether people with disabilities are genuinely included and able to benefit from nature-based solutions. So the next section of the guide focuses on implementation, and this is where inclusion becomes tangible through accessible consultations, inclusive facilitation techniques, effective partnerships, and planning for reasonable accommodation so that participation is possible in practice and not just in principle. Then the guide also recognizes that inclusion is an ongoing process and not a one-off activity. And that's why it includes a section on monitoring and learning with reflection questions, practical indicators, and approaches to adaptive management that can help teams continuously improve their practice. And throughout the guide, we've included practical tools such as checklists, templates, fieldwork trips informed by our fieldwork in both Laos and Solomon Islands, and also case studies drawn from similar experiences where my colleagues from Laos and Solomon and my colleague from CBM Australia, Ruth, was supported this process and help us put together the case studies. These illustrate not only what worked, but also the challenges that our teams encountered and the lessons that can be applied in other contexts. Ultimately, the guide is intended to be a practical companion that supports practitioners to embed disability inclusion throughout the NBS cycle, making inclusion part of how projects are planned, delivered, and improved over time. So how can you use the guide? One of the things we were really very conscious of when developing this guide was a realization that there is no single NBS practitioner or quote unquote NBS practitioner. Nature-based solutions involve many different actors, as we can see from the diversity of all of you here in this webinar, each with different responsibilities and different opportunities to influence inclusion. So rather than producing a guide for one audience, we designed it to be useful across the entire ecosystem. So for instance, if you're a project manager, the guide can help strengthen design from the outset by embedding disability inclusion into planning, budgeting, implementation, and rather than treating it as an afterthought. If you're a field coordinator or a community facilitator, it provides practical techniques for making consultations, meetings, and community engagement processes more accessible and meaningful. For technical advisors, and I could see that there are several JEDC advisors here in this webinar. The guide offers practical ways to integrate disability inclusion across the different elements of nature-based solutions, from looking at governance and accessibility to livelihoods and monitoring and learning, using the evidence that we harvested from the research to inform elements of these areas. And for organizations of persons with disabilities, so I'm very happy who are participating in our webinar from different countries. We hope it becomes a resource for strengthening partnerships with conservation and climate actors and advocating for meaningful participation throughout the project cycle. For government agencies who we all work with, the guide provides practical insights that can inform policy, planning, and the development of more inclusive climate and biodiversity programs. And finally, for donors and development partners, it offers a practical framework for strengthening quality assurance, monitoring, and organizational learning around disability inclusive, nature-based solutions. Well, the important point that we can all take away from the guide is that you don't have to read it from cover to cover. It's designed to be modular and practical. You can use it as a single checklist before a community consultation, or refer to a case study when designing a new project, or use the reflection sessions or reflection questions during a project review. And our collective hope on behalf of our team is that it becomes a resource that practitioners return to, not because they are required to, but because it helps them deliver better and more inclusive nature-based solutions. I now hand it over to my colleague from WWF, Shalene, for this session.
Shalyn, you're
Oh,
on. Oh,
thank
there you
you,
go.
Vero. Sorry. I'll start again. I was going to say thank you, Jerome, and to all of our speakers for sharing today. We have allocated 1 hour to the webinar, and we've already covered a lot of ground on the Disability Inclusion Learning Program. And we would like now to open the floor for questions and any reflections you have. You're welcome, of course, to either raise your hand and ask questions to us directly, or you can post your question in the chat. We are trying to keep the chat interactive and engaging and also answer some of the questions there. And you're welcome to also conversation on the chat. But I'll stop sharing now. And if anyone wants to come off mute, please do so. So maybe we will maybe Jerome and Ruth, I'll share a question with you. It came at the start of the webinar, and several of our colleagues asked questions about budgeting and resources, especially when budget is a limiting factor often when we think about inclusive nature-based solutions. Would you be happy to maybe answer that to the audience? Thank you.
Hi, Shalin, do you want me to go first? And maybe also we'll give opportunity to our colleagues from Laos and Solomon Islands, our OPD partners. But
Absolutely, go for it.
yeah, um, that's really a common challenge in terms of, at least from my experience working with many projects. But our experience in terms of the budget is that in some instances, we can be more creative. It's less really about the money, but um, more towards a having a better design decision. Because as you can see, since accessibility is a key uh, precondition for inclusion, then in instances where there are resource challenges, then that is where creativity comes in. And I would defer to our colleagues from Laos and Solomon Islands, especially our OPD partners who have been innovative and creative in this respect. But nonetheless, if the problem is, since we're already towards the midterm or near the end of a certain project, and we just realized that we need to, support accessibility so that people with disabilities can participate more meaningfully into the project, then I guess the other approach is through reasonable accommodations. And the best approach is to really ask people with disabilities themselves, what do they need to be able to be involved in a more meaningful way in our project activities so that we can resource for it. Other than that, as a learning from this experience, maybe we can document those conversations we have with people with disabilities and the gaps that we experience implementing projects and activities so that in the next run of the program, we can build them in right from the very start. And from my experience, it is going to cost less if we are able to put this in at the outset and build that into the design rather than addressing it and retrofitting a solution, and that entails more cost than addressing it right from the start. So I'll hand it over to you, Shalene, and maybe our colleagues from Laos and Solomon Islands can also input in this regard.
Thank you, Jerome. I will pass it on to the research team for their input if they wish. Thank you. If not, I did have a question, and I think Jerome, Ruth, and everyone in the research team, please jump in. It's really at the start of the project itself. We highly recommend that we kind of engage with OPDs from the start. And there was one question from the audience about how can we ensure and what should we be doing to engage with OPDs at the start. Thank you. Over to you again, Jerome and team.
Thanks, Shalene. It's Ruth speaking. I might jump in, and Jerome, you can jump in as well on this one. I think our experience with engaging OPDs was that we had connections in the two countries that we were involved in as CBM Australia. And so what we did was to bring together WWF staff teams and the OPD representatives at that place and really engage everybody from the outset. So we were involved in giving a vision for what we were thinking about doing in terms of the participatory research, but then the OPD members and the WWF field teams both kind of co-designed with us everything. And I think that engaging OPDs early in a project is a really important factor. And the second part of that was looking at resourcing. There's been a couple of questions that I saw around reasonable accommodations, and kind of what accessibility. Oh, excuse the alarm going off in the background. Yeah, accessibility and other factors that need to be considered. And again, it's through discussions with OPD leaders and to understand what resourcing they need, and what things, as Jerome said, that are maybe not so monetary, but things like send reasonable accommodations, like sending information before a meeting, helping to outline what the meeting would involve, looking at where we meet in terms of, can everybody get into the building, or does everybody have access to mobile phones or good connectivity, and all of those sorts of things. It's really getting to know each other and understanding what it takes to work together. Jerome, can I hand to you?
Yeah, maybe just to add on to that, Ruth, one of the approach that we did was, using a design thinking approach, meaning we design with the end users in mind. And I'm saying this also because there are questions related to, so what about looking at beyond physical disabilities? And the question is absolutely right. Disability inclusion in NBS needs to extend, well beyond physical accessibility. And our research looked across a broad range of disabilities, including psychosocial, intellectual, cognitive, sensory experiences. And for people who may be neurodivergent, this may mean providing, clear and predictable communication, allow different ways of participating and reducing sensory overload during meetings, maybe using plain language, allowing additional processing time, and creating environments where people feel free to are able to feel free, feel safe to contribute. Again, I go back to inclusion being is about designing participation. As a design thinking practitioner myself, so it's about designing participation. So people with different ways of thinking, different ways of communicating, and different ways of participating can engage more meaningfully to influence decisions and benefit from nature-based solutions, and not just ensuring that they can, physically access a site. So again, thanks everyone for making that distinction explicit. We try to cover as much as we can with the time and the resources that we had in during the research, and we were able to come across this issue as well.
Thank you, Jerome. We have a few more minutes. I am gonna take one more question, and Fan and Pon, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do know you're here. If you did want to jump in and share some of your reflections on your side of research, please jump in or put it in the chat. But one question that there was that came through was, what role has the local government played in fostering disability inclusion in NBS in your communities? I think this is a big question. I'm just opening it to the floor if anyone wanted to contribute to this. And again, Fan and Pan is more because I know that the local government in the Lao context was a very important one. If you would like to share. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, good morning. My name is Pan. I'm from Laos. I'm wearing red today with a pair of glasses because I feel like everything is blurry. Okay. For us, in order to engage with the a person with disability in the community, the first thing that we need to reach out is to reach out to the local governments, because the local governments as well as like the district office, they do have the statistic and they do have the information about their communities the best. So the process that we did is we reached out to the government office and try to ask like what are the stakeholders that we could reach out in order to work with the people with disability in the communities. Yeah. And yeah, for my reflection, I feel like since the start of the data collection for the disability inclusion, because not only for the consultant who worked with us during the data collection, which is like Agel, we also have built kind of like the partnership with the another OPD in Pakse as well. We work with LDPA, Lao Disabled People Association, and we still have the partnership. So whenever we have the question like how to engage with the people with disability, we ask them sometime, especially in order to design the NBS model that we are going to support in the phase 2. So I think this partnership, even though it's not officially partnership with the contract and writing stuff, but we can still have the inputs from the person who work with the people with disability and who like dedicating their jobs and time to work to support the people with disability. Because I always believe that to work with the person with disability, the local CSO and the OPD knows the best. Yeah. That's my reflection.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Pan. We really appreciate it. So I guess V, if you could share the one more slide before we start wrapping up. Thank you. I'm just gonna. Sorry, bear with me. Yeah, so really, we've got a few minutes to go. So if we've managed to get to all the questions, I know we haven't, we'll do our best to collate all of them and then send it around with some responses that we gather together. And for now, to leave you with one final slide, we wanted to just maybe ask the participants to think a little about what's one concrete action that you could take to strengthen disability inclusion in your work. It doesn't need to be something very large or complex. It could be like the first step, like we've all been recommending, to start engaging with the organizations of people with disabilities in your project planning from the start. It could be reviewing your accessibility considerations during consultations or workshops. It could be allocating budget for reasonable accommodation, or also using one of the tools or checklists from the practitioner's guide. So with that, we're at time almost. And I wanted to remind everyone, yes, all the slides and the learning package as well will be all released later this month. It will be shared with all the webinar participants by email, and we also uploaded on the CR by Knowledge Hub. It's not there right now. It's almost final. We want to do some copy editing and designing of the report before it's uploaded. And if you do have any questions, feedback, or would like to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out to us. I've put mine and Jerome's email as a start, but if please feel free to reach out to anyone if you know, or we'll connect you with the right people. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and you've got 1 minute to spare. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you, team and everyone. Have a great evening.
You too, Sede. Thanks for joining.